Good morning. It's been a breathless week in politics. The long-awaited Sue Gray report into the lockdown antics in Downing Street finally landed, followed in short order by the so-called tax-cutting Chancellor, raising taxes once again, this time on the profits of energy companies. And despite new measures to help with the soaring cost of living, the drip, drip, drip of MPs calling on the Prime Minister to resign continues. But looming in the background, the war in Ukraine has entered a new phase. The Russian army is slowly seizing Ukrainian territory in the east of the country with every passing day. On this programme, we've heard from the front line, from refugees who fled the war and from world leaders as they scrabble to deal with the scale of the conflict. But this morning comes Russia's response. I sat down with Vladimir Putin's man in London, Ambassador Andrei Kelin, and asked him about the war in eastern Ukraine, if Russia's leader might use nuclear weapons, and I showed him evidence of alleged Russian war crimes. We'll get analysis from Moscow with the BBC's Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, and the latest from the front line with Jeremy Bowen. And as more Tory MPs call on Boris Johnson to resign and one of his own ministers gives him a yellow card, I'll talk to the Northern Ireland Secretary, Brandon Lewis. The government's nicked their windfall tax, so what next for Labour? I'll ask the party's chair, Anneliese Dodds. And to review the papers, the Financial Times' Seb Payne and the Sunday Times chief foreign correspondent Christina Lamb. All that after the news with Roger Johnson.
Thank you, Clive. Good morning. Russia's ambassador to the UK, Andrei Kelin, has said he does not believe that Moscow will use tactical nuclear weapons in the war against Ukraine. Shortly after he ordered the invasion, President Putin put his nuclear forces on high alert. But Mr. Kelin insisted that such weapons would only be used if Russia faced an existential threat. That full interview with the Russian ambassador is coming up here on Sunday morning shortly. Liverpool Football Club have called for an investigation into the security arrangements at last night's Champions League final after thousands of fans were stopped from gaining access to the ground. Police fired tear gas and pepper spray at supporters. UEFA delayed kick-off by more than half an hour, citing security reasons. Liverpool went on to lose 1-0 to Real Madrid. Holidaymakers have faced travel chaos and severe delays at airports, train stations and ferry terminals at the start of the half-term break. EasyJet and TUI have cancelled dozens of flights, blaming a number of issues, including air traffic restrictions and runway works, while long queues have also been seen at London's St Pancras station. That's it from me. The next news here on BBC One is at 1 o'clock. Clive, back to you.
Roger, thank you for that. Let's have a look at some of the front pages. Now, we're going to start with the Sunday Times. Grey diluted parties report there after pressure. Downing Street mandarins demanded that the names of rule breakers be removed. We're going to be looking at that in a little bit more depth later on. Sunday Telegraph, PM's war on rip-off petrol stations. Apparently, Boris Johnson's furious and is vowing to name and shame those who fail to pass on fuel duty cuts. Onto the Observer, Boris Johnson again on the front page. He apparently is trashing the Tory identity, according to party grandees. Partygate and tax messages undermine the brand. More MPs joined call for the Prime Minister to go. The Sunday Express, Go fights to save PM's skin as Tory MPs plot to oust him. A bit more on that a little bit later on as well. The Mail, cheers ma'am, 18 years after the EU ordered us to remove the crown symbol from our pint glasses. Boris Johnson is apparently going to bring them back for the Jubilee. The Sunday Mirror there, finally, Meghan to heal rift with sick dad. Let's go into some of these stories in a bit more detail. Page 7 of the Times, Seb, they failed to collar the big dog. Sue Gray, her report came out, no smoking gun, but he's not out of the woods, is he?
No, this is a reference to something called Operation Save Big Dog, which was a plot within the Tory party to shore up Boris Johnson's position when he was at the height of his potential danger. And this long read in the Sunday Times here says that essentially, as we know, the Sue Gray report was not existential for Boris Johnson, but he's not out of the woods yet. And there's all manner of details in here about what's gone on behind the scenes and this crucial question about whether people in Boris Johnson's inner circle were trying to lean on Sue Gray to water down the report, remove some names from it, or take some of the most difficult details out of there. And the key thing to remember here is Sue Gray was not independent. She was not separate from the civil service or from the government. She works for Boris Johnson. She works for the Prime Minister. And this was never an independent report. But it is clear there's been huge tensions at the heart of government over this report. And I think the key thing is this is not over yet. That we've obviously got the Labour Party asking questions in the House of Commons, another House of Commons investigation into whether the Prime Minister misled Parliament. So even though this report did not collar big dog, as the Sunday Times have put it, he's not out of the woods by far.
Yeah, OK. I mean, the suggestion, Christina, that the Prime Minister's, his authority has been damaged through all of this. I mean, as a foreign affairs correspondent, you can see this damage, apparently, of his reputation on a global level.
Absolutely. I mean, I've been a foreign correspondent for 30 years, and the UK used to be very much respected as a country that upheld integrity and international law. And now we discover that basically 10 Downing Street is party central, that we have a Prime Minister who is a stranger to the truth. And when I travel around, I find people kind of laughing at us. And
but
that's
not in
quite
Ukraine.
Disturbing. Not in Ukraine.
Not in Ukraine. That's
it's
really
very
quite
different.
important, isn't it? Yeah.
I mean, in Ukraine, if you go through, so just came back from there, if you go through checkpoints and you say press Britansky in your best Ukrainian, they all say, we love Boris.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm afraid a number of us were saying, you can have him.
All right. I mean, I just wonder. I mean, just going back to the independence of the Sue Gray report, if it is proved, however, that she was lent on to take names out and stuff, are you saying that that is actually within the bounds of good practice, bearing in mind it wasn't an independent report?
Well, it depends what you define by good practice, isn't it? Because obviously Sue Gray was asked by the Prime Minister as a veteran adjudicator within Whitehall to establish the fact and look at where the wrongdoing exactly was in this instance. Now, the fact that, again, she may have been lent on, as the Sunday Times reports tomorrow, suggests that maybe she was pushed in a particular direction or not. And I think one thing that's very clear from the Sue Gray report as well is, though there are big failures of leadership within regards to the Prime Minister and the Cabinet Secretary Simon Case, she's excoriating about civil servants too who worked in there and did not follow the rules. But the thing is, as I said, there is that House of Commons inquiry which is now going to get going. That will run through to the autumn, and that will look at, did Boris Johnson knowingly mislead? Now, unless you can get a microscope inside his head, it's going to be quite difficult to prove he knowingly misled, but it will look at further evidence and some of the allegations in this story.
But there are some people who believe that this is all being blown out of proportion. No question. I mean, the front page of The Observer, however, is talking about the fact that, you know, Boris Johnson apparently is trashing the Tory brand, trashing the identity of the party. This is according to grandees of the
Yes, the Observer has Ian Duncan Smith, who is not certainly from the left wing of the Tory party and someone who's a more natural supporter of Boris Johnson, saying that the party has an enormous identity problem. Now, a lot of these concerns are put through a policy lens, talking about the economy or tax cuts or cultural issues, but there's a general sense, as the Observer is reporting tomorrow, that there needs to be a reassertion about where the Tory party is going. And obviously we've had this huge cost of living package this week, £22 billion, but a lot of Tories don't actually like that. They would rather the Chancellor was cutting taxes instead. OK, well, one argument for there not being a leadership challenge is the war in Ukraine. Let's go to the Times, page 17. We'll know when the world betrays us, you will tell Kyiv to negotiate. That's according to one point of view in the paper there.
Yeah, this is an article by Andrei Kelin, who is one of Ukraine's best-known writers. He wrote a wonderfully titled novel called Death and the Penguin. And he's talking about what it's like being there. And he says, I understand that those on whom the outcome of the war hinges may not be as interested in Ukraine's victory as I am. And this is the big problem we've seen over the last week. Henry Kissinger at Davos talking about the fact that there needs to be diplomatic negotiations, but also saying that Ukraine will have to cede territory. Now, the big question is how this is going to end, but I think you find it very difficult to find anybody in Ukraine at the moment who agrees that they would have to cede territory. The mood has changed a bit in the last week or so. I mean, morale was very high because they'd pushed Russia out of Kyiv. They were pushing them out of Kharkiv in the north, the second biggest city. But in the east, it's a very different situation. It's much more attritional. It's going to be clearly a long slog. And every Ukrainian you meet, they're fighting, say we need more long-range artillery.
Sure. I mean, Seb, of course, this is feeding into the cost of living crisis because of the situation in terms of food supplies and so on. And we've got more on that in the papers today.
We do, that Boris Johnson spoke to President Zelensky yesterday and raised this issue of exporting grain from Ukraine, because obviously this is fueling inflation across the world. And there is a risk of a global food shortage, particularly later in the year. And the Prime Minister here has urged Russia to allow safe passage to try and get through that. But I think when you look at that issue, it speaks to this kind of global concern about where this thing goes next, as Christina was saying, that the big danger, I think, of people in the Whitehall and in Washington, D.C., is that Vladimir Putin will put forward some kind of peace deal that would see succession of land, and that's going to be very difficult. And those economic domestic pressures at home are going to influence what leaders are saying. And so far, they've taken a very clear view on why it's very important to fight in Ukraine. The UK has obviously been at the forefront of that, but we do have these massive economic pressures at home, and trying to square both those things off is a huge challenge.
I mean, if this goes on for a long time, it's going to be harder to keep that unity, which has been, I mean, frankly, I've been surprised at how much unity there has been from the European and NATO countries.
But we're still getting the denials, aren't we, from the Russians when it comes to atrocities. And, you've reported that war. I've been there too. And we've got our interview with Andrei Kelin, the ambassador here from Russia, a little bit later on. Completely categorical, despite all the evidence put in front of him, that Russia is potentially committing war crimes in this conflict.
I mean, if you go to those places you and I both have, to Bucha, to Irpin, to Hostomel, to Borodyanka, all these places we'd never heard of really, that now synonymous with atrocities, and you talk to people and you see what's happened there. Almost every street you go to, people were killed, tortured, raped. You go to the tent that's there by the Bucha morgue. There were so many bodies that the morgues were overflowing, that refrigerated trucks were overflowing. They had to stop collecting the bodies at one point, and you meet the people queuing there, trying to find their loved ones, what's happened to them, and you hear those stories. These were civilians that were killed in these places, and also the number of schools and hospitals that were bombed. I don't know how they can possibly say that these atrocities didn't happen.
They did, it has to be said. All right, okay, Christina, Seb, thanks for that. Now, time for a look at all the weather news, and Louise Leah has the details. Hi, Louise.
Hi there, Clive. Well, I have managed to find some sunshine. It's a beautiful start out to the west, as you can see from Argyll and Bute, but the shower clouds gathering. It's not spoiling the early morning walk for this little chap, but yes, we've seen some sharp showers along the Norfolk coast so far today. And those showers are going to continue to stream in off the North Sea, maybe push a little bit further inland. We've also seen 1 or 2 showers as well running down through the Irish Sea into the Cheshire Gap. So as the afternoon progresses, continue to see those clouds develop and the showers arrive. It's going to be a coolish story as well, because the wind is picking up and it's coming from the north. So 9 to 14 degrees in Scotland. We may well see Northern Ireland dodging the showers and keeping some glimpses of sunshine, but generally across England and Wales, it's a cloudier afternoon. Showers very hit and miss, some of them turning quite heavy, possibly thundery across Devon and Cornwall by the end of the day, and not quite as warm with a high of 16 degrees. Now, as we move into Monday morning, the wind direction will change subtly, but drive the showers in from the west coast potentially. They will push further inland as we go through the afternoon. Again, those temperatures a little bit disappointing for this time of year, 11 to 16 degrees. You want to know about the all-important bank holiday weekend that's approaching? Well, the risk of showers early on in the week, but hopefully something a little bit warmer and a little bit drier as we head towards the bank holiday weekend. Clive.
Let's hope so. Louise, thank you for that. Now, after 5 months of calling for a windfall tax and being told by the government it was a stupid idea, the Labour Party got its way this week as the Chancellor introduced a levy on the profits of oil and gas companies. Labour is winning the battle of ideas, declared the Shadow Chancellor Rachel Reeves. But does winning the battle of ideas get them any closer to winning the next election, especially if the government keeps nicking their policies and offering a bit more on top? Well, the woman who will oversee Labour's next election campaign is the party chair, Anneliese Dodds, who joins me now. It's good to see you. Thanks for coming in. Let's just go back to Ukraine. My interview with Ambassador Kelin is coming up a little bit later on. Russia says it's planning to take the Donbas region. Are there any circumstances under which Labour would accept that?
Well, no, we're very concerned indeed about these recent revelations, and I think we've just been hearing about some of the truly appalling war crimes and attacks on civilians that have characterised this conflict. We will continue to be working with the government as the opposition, and of course wanting to work with all the other NATO countries to do everything that we can to support Ukraine in its defence of itself. The very brave fighters, of course, in that country at the moment.
But could you ever see President Zelensky feeling that he had to do that and would do that in order to end this war?
Well, in this conflict, of course, we've seen a sovereign nation being attacked by Russia, and ultimately the president, I'm sure, will be focused on everything he can do to defend his country. I think it'd be completely inappropriate for a politician sitting here in the safety of a London studio to pontificate about circumstances on the ground. And all that I can say really is that I think we all stand shoulder to shoulder with him, with the people of Ukraine, and with those who are so very bravely trying to defend that territory.
OK, a lot of pressure on the government to do something about the soaring cost of living. This week, the government gave the worst of households £1,200 to deal with that. Labour was offering £600. Are you embarrassed that actually the Conservatives are way more generous than you would have been?
No, not at all. And actually, for the most hard-pressed families, Labour plans would have supported them more. For example, for a couple who have 2 children who are in receipt of universal credit, Labour would have supported them more. But, you know, the really frustrating thing, I would say, is that, yes, we've seen some action, finally, by government on the symptoms of the cost of living crisis, action that, as you said, Labour had been calling for many, many months, 5 months that we were calling for a windfall tax. But we're not seeing any action on the causes of that cost of living crisis. We haven't heard anything from the government, for example, around home insulation. Labour's been calling for many months now for a mass insulation programme. That would be taking £400 off people's bills, not just this year, but every year into the future. They haven't done that. They also haven't taken action to grow our economy. Labour saying we need to buy, make and sell more in our country. Why is that important? Because we've had lower growth under Conservative-led governments than under Labour-led.
But it's not
just a big problem.
Sure, but it's not just about the cost of living crisis, is it? And what the public's perception of where the Labour Party is in sticking up for them. I mean, the government announced 25% windfall tax on energy firms' profits. You were only proposing 10%. So what is the message you're trying to get across to the public on this?
The message that we're trying to get across to the public, and I would say particularly to the government, is that they need to take action to support people. I've been contacted by people who've emailed me first thing in the morning, and they've said that they've been thinking right through the night how they're going to be covering their bills, how they're going to be dealing with that cost. Now, of course, we welcome the fact that the government has finally listened around some of this, but there seems to be the pattern with the Conservatives over the last few years, that they'll be dragged kicking and screaming to take action at the last minute. As I said, 5 months since Labour started to call for a windfall tax, but they don't deal with the reasons for problems in the first place. Again, when it comes to energy security, I mean, we're just talking about home insulation. You know, Labour's also said we need to have much more secure energy for the future. We've said we should be doubling onshore wind, for example, tripling solar, ending the delay on nuclear.
Right.
The government hasn't acted decisively on any of those things.
Well, the government would argue that it does have an energy plan, so we'll leave it there. Anneliese Dodds, thanks very much indeed for joining us. Thank you. Well, the war in Ukraine has now entered its 4th month, and the momentum seems to be shifting towards the Russians. Earlier, Ukraine's successes in the north of the country have given way to Russian advances in the east, where they're closer to supply lines and can fully utilize their heavy weapons. Well, our correspondent Jeremy Bowen is in the Donbas region where Russian forces are advancing. Jeremy, thanks very much indeed for joining us. What's the overall picture there on the battlefield? And is there a sense that the Russians are making small, but they are making gains throughout all this?
They're making steady gains, Clive. They're grinding forward. They're using their heavy artillery to absolutely pound the Ukrainian positions, and the Ukrainians are brave and they are very resolute, but they don't have equivalent or superior firepower, and that is the problem that they have, and that's what soldiers say to me and what I've seen myself. And you can see loads of preparations being made for more Russian advances, moving things like expensive tractors off the very extensive farms back further, deeper into Ukraine, digging second, third line defenses, which they might have to fall back to. Things like that. So while this does not mean that the Ukrainians are about to lose the war, they are steadily losing pieces of this region, Donbas.
Yeah, I mean, you were one of the first journalists, Jeremy, to not just highlight, but to analyse, as far as you could on the ground, evidence of Russian atrocities and war crimes, painstakingly going through video footage and talking to witnesses. I was there when you were trying to do that. You've been here before, of course, during the wars in the former Yugoslavia. Can you see a day, perhaps, when those people who are giving orders in this conflict, leading the Russian lines, that they might be brought to book for potential war crimes?
I think it's doubtful the way things stand at the moment, because while there are many thousands of cases being investigated by the Ukrainians, and one man, a junior tank commander, has been sentenced to life in prison, the Yugoslav war crimes process worked because it was authorized by the UN Security Council and funded, and they worked for more than 20 years to accumulate evidence and bring those people to book who were extradited to have their years in court. And of course, Russia is a veto-wielding member of the Security Council, so I don't see that avenue working. You know, as for those war crimes, what I saw was definitive. You know, I got into areas with my team hours after the Russians had left, the same day, when bodies were lying on roads, and we had drone pictures of those people being killed weeks earlier when the Russians arrived. So, you know, I am not a lawyer, and I'm certainly not a judge, and so you cannot say until it's proven in court that they were war crimes. But my goodness me, it seemed to me that there was a very, very strong case and strong evidence.
Yeah. Okay. Jeremy, many thanks to you and the team out there in Ukraine. Thank you for that. Well, that's the picture on the ground in Ukraine, but what about the view from Russia? Earlier this week, I spoke to Ambassador Andrei Kelin at the Russian embassy here in London. Some people may find pictures of civilian deaths I showed him in our conversation distressing. Ambassador, the facts are clear. Thousands of people have been killed in this war so far. 14 million people have had to leave their homes since Russia decided to invade Ukraine. Why did Russia start this war?
This is not a war. This is a limited operation. And I have to say the reasoning, which probably is not popular here in media in Great Britain, because you are presenting only one side of the story, and I have now to speak about the other side of the story, and I would appreciate very much that it will be heard. So by now, events are going on in the east, southeast of Ukraine, and this is clear that during 8 years after nationalistic government has come to power in Kiev, they have built a fortress over there, a fortress in which best of Ukrainian forces are now concentrated. And this is a highly fortified area, region, which is along the line of delimitation of Donbas, from which we are certain events could be started, whether it will be used by Ukrainian army as defensive, or we have got quite a lot of evidences that they were planning offensive against Donbas region, against Russians living over there. And just to prevent this attack, which will be applauded, I will sure, because in the Western countries, because they are acting on their own territory. So we have to take preventive forces. As President Putin has said, we have had no other way but to do this.
First of all, thousands of people dying and 14 million people having to leave their homes does not suggest it's a limited military operation. It is a full-scale war. And there is absolutely no evidence that the Ukrainian forces were launching some kind of huge attack in the Donbas region. That's not there. The evidence isn't there.
Okay. Once again, it is for 8 years, Ukrainian forces were shelling Donbas, Russian people, civilians mainly. They killed quite a lot of them. Young children were born and then even raised, has gone to school under Ukrainian shelling of it. We have made many attempts to pacify the situation, also via Minsk agreements.
According to the UN Human Rights Commissioner, more civilians have been killed in the conflict since Russia invaded in February than in the last 8 years. Where is the evidence that Russian-speaking Ukrainians were under threat? That evidence isn't there.
No, probably you haven't heard what I have said. How many people have been killed?
I've heard what
How many people have been killed? And I can assure you that it is not our idea to kill civilians. Our militaries, they are targeting only military infrastructure, because military infrastructure in Ukraine remained after the Soviet Union. It is the biggest one. We would like to diminish Ukrainian capabilities for striking, first of all, and we need to help these two now independent republics to survive. And it is more than 4 million of people. It's quite a lot of people over there.
You're saying you want to help the people in the East survive. The evidence suggests that there's been widespread devastation as a result of Russian attacks. And there's currently a huge bombardment, Russian bombardment, in that part of the country, in the East. Is your aim to take and keep that part of the country?
Our aim, as it has been formulated, is to help now to these republics to survive. But be sure that we are going to assist and to help of rebuilding of that. We have no other mean at the moment, because the fortress, the Ukrainian troops, they are taking the civilian targets, they are using the buildings to put artillery in it and tanks underneath. So they are mainly hiding among the buildings in the settlements, in the villages and small towns. It's a very difficult job for our professional forces to seize this building one by one. After that,
have you given up on Kiev and
yeah,
focusing your war in the East?
It's a good question. None of our leaders, neither president or the others, has ever said that we would like to seize Kiev. And I don't believe that it is possible to seize Kiev or to occupy Kiev. It's a big city. It will be linked.
You did have troops. You did have troops on the way to Kiev. I was there at the time.
Yes, we did have troops, but not for seizure of Kiev.
So why were they there?
I'm not a military person. I'm a diplomat for 40 years. But even I do understand if you would like to do something, then on one front, then you have to do some different things on the other front, just to stretch.
Okay, so you have given up on Kiev. There will be no attacks on the capital.
We didn't have a goal of seizing Kiev at the initial stage of the operation, and I don't believe that that's a possibility.
Okay. You've talked about Russian forces not targeting civilian areas. You've talked about them being professional. and waging this war in a professional manner. I'd like you to have a look at this CCTV footage here, which shows 2 Russian soldiers at a building in Ukraine taking aim at 2 civilians walking away from them.
No,
They're walking away.
If I had, what iPad, I could also. If I had iPad, I would be eager to show you that every day Ukrainian forces are shelling innocent civilians in Donbas, cities, towns, and villages, and we have.
These men, sir, are walking away from the soldiers.
Yeah.
You can see it there. They are shot and they are killed. Is this how Russia is conducting this war?
I cannot tell whether there's Russian soldiers or who else.
They are absolutely Russian soldiers. It has been verified, sir.
Is it a
It's
film?
been verified. They are Russian soldiers.
This is non-conversation. Non-conversation. You are showing me something, probably a piece of a film, or a piece of a game, or a joke, or whatever. It's computer games, and telling me, let's see what it is.
CCTV footage from a building that has been corroborated. The 2 soldiers took aim at 2 people walking away from them and shot them dead. They then went into the building, and the CCTV shows them taking off their uniforms, wiping down the sweat from underneath their arms, and taking drinks that were in the building and looting food.
Once again,
is that how Russian troops
are we having an interview with you, or you would like to express your ideas? Please.
I have expressed the question, which is that how Russian troops are conducting this war?
No, you did express your point of view. I did express my point of view, and I can assure you that I pursue very attentively what's going on in the east of Ukraine.
Okay. Let's go to the town of Bucha, which has become synonymous around the world with the crimes that many people point to of the Russian military. Can you explain why civilians have been shot in cold blood in the streets of Bucha? And these are photographs that suggest exactly what happened, sir. This photograph on the left was taken in late February before Russian troops entered the town. This photograph here is on the 19th of March, after Russian troops just after Russian troops were about to leave. And that is the result, dead bodies in the street. Again, sir, I'll ask you one more time. Is this how Russian troops are supposed to conduct this war? Because the evidence suggests that they're committing war crimes, sir.
If you are really interested in this issue, then you should understand that after Russian troops has left Bucha, for 3 days, no one has found any troops, any bodies on the streets. And there are a lot of evidence of that. After 3 days, someone has come and discovered some bodies. Besides, can you imagine that professional troops, as Russian troops, they will step over the bodies of someone during weeks and just leaving them behind? For what? For next provocation, just to be done when someone is coming? I cannot believe it, frankly speaking. This is very unprofessional.
The BBC has verified the footage, and I have been to Bucha.
I have seen the verification.
I have spoken to some of the residents, local people, who heard the gunshots, and they corroborate each other's story independently. And I went to Yablunska Street, and I spoke to people in the neighboring street, and they heard the gunshots in a nearby school, in a couple of other buildings, and in Yablunska Street, which is where these pictures come from. Sir, again, why is Russia conducting this war in this way, committing war crimes?
Of Bucha, in his initial statement, when it has been freed, has confirmed that Russian troops have left. Everything is clean and calm. The town or village, this is town, yes, in a normal state. Nothing is happening. No bodies are on the street. But next, after it has been done. But anyway,
so this is all made up, sir. This is all a fabrication. All this evidence is a fabrication.
In our view, it is a fabrication. It is now why it is used just to interrupt negotiations. There were, at the beginning of the conflict, we have had very good negotiations. start. And Ukrainian, they have had a constructive position, but then something changed. Someone has decided to use this incident to cut off negotiations. Since that time, unfortunately, it's a stalemate. It is for about a month that the draft agreement that has been based on Ukrainian proposition is lying in Kiev, and we have a prolongation of war. And what we have from London, it is not the desire to finalize it or to negotiate it. We hear every day new appeals to send more weapons to Ukraine, to fight until the last Ukrainian soldier, to continue the conflict, and no negotiator until Russia will be beaten.
You say everything I've shown you is a fabrication. Bucha, the pictures, it's a fabrication. You don't believe it, it's not true. Is this a fabrication, sir? This is the city of Mariupol, completely devastated.
Don't worry about Mariupol. We have already
Many people are worrying about Mariupol.
Are you going to listen
sir?
to me, or are you going to talk yourself? If you will continue to talk, then it is over. We can finish on that point.
What's your view of Mariupol then, sir? Tell me.
We have established a governmental commission which is going to rebuild Mariupol totally. We will provide for this necessary financial resources for rebuilding of it, and believe me, it will be done.
We can see from the pictures, these are residential areas, sir. Residential areas that have been bombed
houses. We
to
have
hell.
lots of experiences.
Complete devastation, sir. These are residential areas. These are not legitimate military targets.
We have a lot of registered cases when
this is over a widespread area.
When Ukraine artillery was shelling residential areas, especially in
This is a war crime,
and,
isn't it? This is a war crime.
As I have told you, we have lots of evidence when Ukraine artillery deliberately was shelling this, what you are showing to me.
So this is the result of Ukrainian artillery, is that what you're saying?
It might be a result. I'm not speak about.
So the Ukrainian government has decided to completely flatten one of its own cities and leave this kind of devastation.
Mariupol has a long history, and I remember that in 2014, the inhabitants of Mariupol, they have voted at the referendum just to get out of Ukraine. But after that, pretty quickly, Ukrainian forces has restored over their power, and those who has voted for that or who has activated for that, they have been seized and taken to some place.
I've tried to provide.
Mariupol is a part of Donetsk Republic.
Of what is happening, and you won't accept this clear evidence that I've offered today.
I do accept that Mariupol is destroyed by fighting.
But you won't accept that it's the result of Russian forces?
No, it can be both, because this is a fight. This is fight.
So there is a possibility in your mind that Russia is responsible for all this? That is a possibility, sir?
As I have said, Russians are targeting military infrastructure. Collateral damage is possible. I used to work in NATO for many years, and I was explained several times that collateral damage happens all the time in the conflicts.
That's collateral damage. That's what you think. That could be collateral damage. Okay, I mean, as I say, you won't accept any of the evidence that I've put forward that Russia may be responsible or is responsible, and that Russia, frankly, has committed war crimes. But other Russian officials know what is going on. Let me just read to you what Russia's counselor to the United Nations in Geneva, Boris Bondarev, said this week after resigning his position. He said, the aggressive war unleashed by Putin against Ukraine is not only a crime against the Ukrainian people, but also perhaps the most serious crime against the people of Russia. What do you think he means when he says this is a crime against the Russian people?
We know this guy. He is very unprofessional. We have, of course, people who think differently. He is one of them. That's all right. But I can say you that 75% of the Russian population do support
But
the
he
limited
is
operation.
a senior official in the Russian delegation at the United Nations.
We know the guy. He is, yes, he stayed for some time at the ministry. He used to work over there, but he did not have our respect. Not before and not after this statement.
He doesn't have your respect. He doesn't have your respect for
Any
what
other
he
question,
said.
Clive, excuse me.
He doesn't have your respect.
Do you have any other questions?
I do, sir. I do. It must have taken a lot of courage on his part to say those things,
It is
don't
up
you
to
think?
him. He has done it, and let it be like that.
You are not in any way willing to echo his words, given everything that I've shown you today.
In no way, absolutely.
He's deluded. He's stupid. Just doesn't understand what's going on.
It depends on him and on his motivation. Perhaps he would like to work for UK, so let him do this.
I wonder, actually, are you too afraid to echo his words?
Me? In no way. Absolutely. Clive, as I have been shown what you would like to ask me, it was totally different issues. If you are only interested to provoke me to something or
I'm genuinely not here
to
to provoke you,
discuss
sir. I'm genuinely not here to provoke
it is not about that.
I'm simply
then
putting
it will be our last
points of view. I'm simply putting other points
we can finish
of view.
on this
I
point.
mean, there is the suggestion from our Foreign Secretary, Liz Truss, that this war will not end until Vladimir Putin and Russian forces, his forces, leave Ukraine in its
She's very belligerent. Your Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mrs. Liz Truss, she is neither a professional military man or she's not for a long time at this position, but she is very belligerent. If she would like to continue the war, she will prolong the conflict, and it is up to her, of course, to make this statement or to make these deeds. But it will be no good for Ukraine, it will be no good for the European peace and stability, and Europe itself. We took note very much of this position, of course, and on the position that UK would like to supply more and more arms, not to think about the future of Ukraine or of Europe, not to think about what's going to happen after that with Ukrainian people, but just to instigate the conflict. Why this? What's the motivation for that? To make Russia more favourable. It's an illusion, as recent 3 months after sanctions has been imposed has shown. Our economy has been not toppled down. Okay, inflation rate will be in Russia this year about 15%. In the UK, it's about 10 to 12%. It's not a big difference, of course, after all these sanctions. What's the use of that? For UK, where is the profit? Where is the benefit of UK?
Well, threats have been made towards the West as a result of Vladimir Putin's invasion. Dmitry Kiselyov, who runs Russia one of the largest TV stations in the country, he said on air recently that one Russian nuclear missile could plunge Britain into the depths of the sea and turn whatever may be left of them into a radioactive desert. Do you believe President Putin would be willing to launch a nuclear attack on Britain?
No, I don't believe that. Dmitry Kiselyov, he's a journalist. He is like you, is trying to find something juicy and to put it on the television and to make it loud statement about that. He's done it, like you also tried to instigate me to.
Do you believe that?
But it instigated a discussion.
Okay.
It instigated a discussion and provoked a discussion.
You say that there will not be a nuclear attack on the UK. Do you believe that there could be the use of a tactical nuclear weapon in the war in Ukraine?
No. Tactical nuclear weapon, in accordance with the Russian military doctrine, is not used in conflicts like that at all.
So you do not believe that will happen?
I don't think so.
Can you categorically say it will not happen?
We have a very strict provision on the issues of the use of tactical nuclear weapon, and it is mainly when the existence of the state is endangered. It has nothing to do with the current operation over there.
But wasn't that the reasoning for going into Ukraine in the first place? That
What?
you said to me at the beginning of this conversation that the suggestion was that Ukraine was building up its forces to launch an attack in the east.
Yes. Yes, and we will deal it with conventional operation, limited conventional operation. Perhaps you have noticed that we do not increase number of our forces over there. We believe that it is sufficient to deal with the situation.
Can I ask you about the president himself, President Putin? I mean, there's
I
been a
will
lot
not
of
comment on the President Putin.
A lot of speculation about his health. You've got
Not
no
at all.
comment on that.
I have no idea, and I'm not speculating about the authorities.
Okay, I fully understand that. I mean, we've heard everything you've said today.
Okay.
You've refuted all the evidence that I've put forward, that you've been able to see with your own eyes.
If
and
it
the
is,
whole of the rest of the
once
world
again,
is
I'm
seeing.
convinced that UK is not interested in the end state or what's going on over there. But it is small points you would like to take out of the general situation and to continue to press on them. It is the same in the newspapers, absolutely, and the same on the television.
You see, that's very interesting, sir, because the Russian people potentially have an excuse for not wanting to see the evidence and see the truth. They're fed propaganda. The vast majority are fed propaganda. A free journalist working in Russia would, unfortunately, unfortunately, could well be sent to jail for 15 years if they say that this is a war.
Clive,
say that
tell
this
me
is
please,
a limited
where
military
are now
operation rather than a
Russian
war.
journalists? Why you prohibited the television stations like Sputnik, Russian television? They are now prohibited from this space at all. Even the first channel second channel of the Russian television has been put under sanctions in the UK. So you do not, London, not you, perhaps not, you're a journalist, London do not allow any alternative version at all. You do not want to listen and to hear. As your representatives in the international organizations, they are now not to hear the Russian diplomats. They are running out of the halls.
We've been trying to work out what the story is, both sides of the argument. I've been to Ukraine 3 times. I've reported on the story.
You have been
And
only for 2 weeks in Kiev.
You have been here, and you have no excuse because you have access to the world's media and how the whole of the rest of the world is reporting this story, and not just the propaganda.
What I would suggest, because we are talking with you for about half an hour, it is quite long. I'm not sure what will remain during the footage on Sunday. But I would advise you very much, because we are making now press tour to Donbas republics, to see the other side of the medal. And press tour to Mariupol, by the way, it was recently, I'm not sure when, but I think it's a couple of weeks ago. Go over there, talk to people. Not only over there, but also in Melitopol, those who were living under these conditions, those who have seen this Azov battalion and what they are really doing and who are them, how they are, what is the reputation of them. Donbas battalion, Azov battalion, all the others. You will see it with your own eyes.
So I'm still trying to
Sitting
understand.
just for 2 weeks in Kiev will not give, sitting for 2 weeks in Kiev will not give you an opportunity to have.
Could I just interject an idea here? I've been in Donbas, and I've been around the country. And
which side of the
when was the last
line?
when was the last time you were in Ukraine, sir?
Really what?
When was the last time you were in Ukraine?
I was in Kiev during the Maidan revolution over there.
So we're going back quite a few years. I was there in the last three months, and I've been there since the beginning of the war. What I'm trying to understand, sir, is why you are reluctant to acknowledge the facts on the ground. I don't understand. I absolutely don't understand.
Facts on the ground should be accepted. About 8 years of shelling of Donbas and killing civilian people over there, which has triggered an operation which is going on now. Okay, good.
Okay, thank you, Ambassador. Thank you very much indeed. The Russian Ambassador Andrei Kelin, and you can watch a longer version of my interview with him on BBC iPlayer. Now, to help us make sense of some of what he said, let's turn to the BBC's Russia editor, Steve Rosenberg, who's in Moscow live for us now. Steve, it's good to see you. You've spent years trying to understand the Russian mindset, not least in times of war. I wonder what stood out in that interview for you.
frankly speaking, Clive, what the ambassador said there, we've been hearing for years from Russian officials whenever their country is accused of anything. All accusations are rebuffed, all evidence of Russian complicity is dismissed. And what you end up with is this kind of parallel reality in which, for example, CCTV footage of Russian soldiers shooting dead unarmed Ukrainian civilians is dismissed as, what did the ambassador call it, a joke, a game, a computer game, where the horrors of Bucha are dismissed as a fabrication, and where the levelling of Mariupol, this extensive damage to residential areas, is sort of brushed aside as, well, either collateral damage or blamed on Ukrainian soldiers. In other words, none of this is ever Russia's fault. Everyone is against Russia, everyone is blaming Russia, everyone is accusing Russia. Russia is the innocent party here. This is the Kremlin narrative, which we've heard many times before. We heard it after the Salisbury poisonings, we heard it after the attempted assassination of the Russian opposition leader Alexei Navalny, and we're hearing it again now.
Yeah, I mean, the protestations that the Russians are never responsible for anything bad, is that for our consumption in the outside world, the West, or is it really for domestic consumption?
I think it's principally for domestic consumption, because I think really Russian officials don't believe that they could convince the outside world that the situation is very different. I thought what was interesting in the interview was the ambassador started very clearly by saying this is not a war, this is a limited operation. But he went on to use the word war a couple of times in that interview, probably accidentally. He's not the only Russian official to have done that. And it's not surprising, really, because I mean, all the Russians, most of the Russians I've spoken to over the last 3 months in the towns and cities we've visited have used the word war. They've said it's a war. And the point is that, you know, propaganda in the state media here is very powerful, but it can't force people to accept that what is happening is a special military operation and not a war.
All right. Steve Rosenberg live in Moscow. Many thanks, Steve. Let's turn to my final guest now of the morning, and it's the Northern Ireland Secretary Brandon Lewis. Hello to you. Thanks for joining us. You just heard that interview. You saw a little bit of it. And Ambassador Kelin, he told me that the Russians, they're going to take Donbas, and they seem to be making gains in the east of the country. Is that something that this government would accept, that Boris Johnson would accept?
No, look, I'm not a military expert. I saw a big chunk of that interview, not all of it, but look, our position has been all the way through this. The Prime Minister's position has been very clear. We support the sovereign, democratic country of Ukraine, and that's why we're putting in so much support, not just in the conversations the Prime Minister's having with President Zelensky, but actually in the financial support and the military defensive support as well, which I'd say Northern Ireland is playing its part in with the NLAWs and Star Street that come from Belfast as well.
We are, however, getting suggestions from the French that there should be concessions, from the Germans as well, that perhaps there needs to be territory ceded in order to bring this whole thing to an end. Would you ever, do you think, reach the point where you would start applying pressure to President Zelensky in order to try to bring this to a swift end?
Look, I think actually the Prime Minister's support for President Zelensky and the country's support for Ukraine on a whole range of levels has been clear from the beginning. This is about the people of Ukraine and, as I say, the sovereign democratic country and government of Ukraine being in control of their destiny. This is a force that has come in from Putin, completely unwarranted. I have to say the excerpts I saw from I didn't see all of the interview, but some of what I saw from that was quite astonishing, I think, in some of the denial of the reality of what's happened that people like yourself have seen firsthand. I've obviously seen what people like yourself, Clive, have been reporting over the period. And I think it is right as a country, as a democratic country, that we stand up and support the sovereignty of a country like that, because there is always that follow-on question, well, if we don't stand up now and support an area like that and support the work Ukraine's doing to defend itself, what's next? So I think it is right that we continue that support, and I know the Prime Minister is very, very determined about that.
Yeah, you may have heard what he said about Liz Truss. He called her
yes.
belligerent.
And look, can I just say, I think it's absolutely right that our Foreign Secretary stands up for what is right.
But is it making potentially the situation worse? Some have hoped.
Look, hold on. Let's go back to the starting point. Putin has invaded Ukraine unwarranted in the most abhorrent way. I think it is absolutely right that as a friend of Ukraine, as a country, supporting a sovereign state, supporting democracy, supporting the West, that we call out where something's done that is abhorrent, that is wrong, and Russia and Putin need to step back.
Let's turn to domestic matters now. Did anyone in Downing Street put pressure on Sue Gray to change, water down her report?
Look, Sue Gray, I've worked with Sue Gray in a number of roles, both roles I've done and roles she has done in the past. Sue Gray has put out a report. I have absolute confidence, and I know Sue Gray well enough to know she has put out a report that she is comfortable with, that she is happy with. She had the free rein to take that report where she wanted to take it, and she has published a report that, and I have to say, as she noted in the final version, the Prime Minister's already taken on board the recommendations from her interim report as well.
You can cast iron guarantee no pressure whatsoever was put on Sue Gray to alter the final report that she handed in.
Not only am I confident of that, but I know Sue Gray well enough to know that pressure on Sue Gray would not have an outcome. Look,
you did put the report out for a meeting before it was published?
I've met Sue Gray in my job talking about union issues a number of times, and I've worked with her in previous jobs as well. Sue Gray is not somebody who is pressured into doing things by anybody. Sue is not only independent, she's a phenomenally professional civil servant, and she's put out a report that she is happy with, that she is confident about. Otherwise, I know Sue Gray well enough to know she wouldn't have put it out, and I know she would have had the freedom and the space to write the report that she felt answered the questions she was set out and tasked to answer in the first place.
Okay, I mean, yesterday 2 more MPs called on the Prime Minister to resign, and they've revealed that there are more letters of no confidence going in. If 54 MPs submit letters, there's a vote on his leadership. Would Boris Johnson survive a vote of no confidence, do you think?
Yes, but I go further. I don't think we're in that space. Look, one of the things I know, again...
Getting there.
Well, you say that, but I know from my previous job as chairman of the party, there's only one person who knows how many letters are in. That's the chairman of the 1922 committee. Anything beyond that is just supposition. And I think all of us actually in Westminster, rather than getting involved in Westminster internal stories, what people want to see is us focused on delivering for people with serious issues like the challenges in Ukraine, the global inflation challenges that's affecting the challenges on people's pockets and their ability to be able to afford things. That's what people want to see us focused on, not the internal machinations of any particular political party.
Yeah, suggestions that the brand of the Conservative Party is being damaged. One of the MPs who called on the Prime Minister to resign, Steve Bryan, he says he doesn't feel like he can go out and defend the indefensible. In no way am I comparing you to Ambassador Kelin. But I'm just wondering, how difficult is it for you every single day to have to come out and defend the actions of the Prime Minister when it comes to these lockdown parties?
Actually, I think it's very easy to come out and talk about what we're doing. For a couple of reasons. First of all, we've seen throughout, since 2010 in the Conservative Party, sadly we had colleagues talking about whether the Prime Minister under David Cameron would survive and how long he would survive. I was chairman through the situation with Theresa May. I've been a candidate 4 days before an election in 2015 where polling came out saying I was going to lose my seat. Not only did I win it, but I increased my majority, and we won a majority in 2015 that people said we couldn't. We saw similar actually in 2019 where polling had a particular line and actually the results were quite different. I think, and what I get, and I have to say from my constituents even this week, the majority of correspondence I've had from constituents outside of their direct acute issues the individuals want dealt with on the wider issues have been around the national issues people are focused on, not this kind of thing. And they want to see us dealing with those issues around the challenges of how they afford fuel and food.
I'm talking about your own party though. I'm talking about members of your own party. These isn't Labour, these aren't critics outside. Alicia Cairns has talked about the shameful lengths some will pursue to preserve this premiership. Is she talking about you?
Well, I hope not. I mean, I know Alicia, and I've dealt with Alicia before. She was a member of Parliament when she was a candidate, as well as in her time as a parliamentarian. But to have to hear that. But look, one of the things you get, and we're a very, very big party. I would argue, actually, in UK politics, our party, we're not only the only party that represents and works and campaigns in every part of the United Kingdom, We're actually a very, very broad church. And that means at any given time, there will always be people in our party with different views. That is actually part of the strength of our party
now.
as well.
It has to be said. There's no question about that.
Well,
loses...
sorry, Clive. I'm sorry. As I say, having been chairman in 2018 and 19, I would challenge that.
Okay.
And we then went on and won the 2019 election because we had the right man as Prime Minister.
Briefly, if he loses the next 2 by-elections that are coming up, is he out?
No, I don't think so, but I equally don't think we'll lose those 2 by-elections. I think we've got a very strong case, we've got great candidates, and we'll all be out campaigning to win them because that's what's in the best interest of people in those areas.
Brandon Lewis, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us. Thank you. And that's it from me. If you missed any of the programme or want to catch a longer version of my interview with Ambassador Kelin, then you can find all of that and more on the BBC iPlayer. Sophie will be back next week, but from me and the team, bye-bye.